Hi, I am Jennifer Purcell, and welcome to my podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss, discover, and learn more about the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD and other learning challenges. I do have a website for this podcast, and it is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account for the podcast. They are all under the same name, which is Living with NLD. I also have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which can be found by Googling the title of the podcast, which is Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. I would like to tell you about a nonprofit that I use for my research for this podcast. It is called the Nvld Project, and I use their blog for my research. They are a nonprofit that is based in New York and is trying to get Nvld back on the DSM, and they provide many resources for people with Nvld on their website. I'll provide you with the website for them in the podcast description. All proceeds from the ads on this podcast will be donated towards the Nvld Project. Please feel free to explore the other topics on the podcast, and hopefully you will learn something new from them. I hope you enjoy today's episodes. Hi, I would like to announce that the next Facebook chat for people with NLD and other learning challenges will be on February 19th, which is the third Saturday of that month. And for those of you who are not familiar with this group, it is a safe space for you to talk about things that you may want to, and to have it be in a safe space that you can have people who support you with what you're talking about and be able to relate to it and listen to it. And it doesn't have to be about NLD or the other learning challenges that you might have, but it can be about that if you want it to be. So that's what that group is for. And then, so again, it's on February 19th, which is the third Saturday, and it's at 10 a.m. Pacific time zone, and it usually goes until about 11:30 Pacific time zone in the morning. So if you would like to attend that group, you could email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com, or you can go to Living with NLD on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter and message me about it. Thanks. And today I am very excited to announce that BetterHelp is now sponsoring this podcast. I have had 7 years of therapy, so I know it can help change your life if you not only let it, but work on the personal goals that you set with your therapist. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better, because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are the greatest asset. And special offering to listeners of Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, you can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at BetterHelp slash I'll put in the link in the podcast description for you. That's BetterHelp, HELEP. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast. Hello, so today's interview will be with Greg and about his life with NLD and about how he experiences it and how he deals with the challenges and symptoms that NLD presents. And this is the first part of his interview. His interview will be in 3 parts. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, good morning, everybody. I am Jennifer Purcell, or Ever Changing Butterfly, as my pen name. And today I am here with Greg. We are going to be interviewing him and myself on our lives with NLD. And I would like to have Greg start off on introducing himself to you guys.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Greg, and obviously, and I'm here in New Hampshire. Recently moved here with my wife just a couple of months ago from Colorado. So I used to live here in New Hampshire previously, and just kind of getting the lay of the land again, and looking for work and that sort of thing, which I'm sure we'll talk more about.
Thank you, Greg. So, for those of you who don't know what I do other than the podcast, I work with my parents. My mom is a minister. She has been a minister for almost 40 years. And my dad is the facility manager and property manager at the church. So, I help them out at the church, and I've been doing that full time for, almost 9 months now, since last summer. And I basically am their admin assistant there. I also help out with doing most of the tech stuff. Since I'm millennial, I find that pretty easy to do. And I also help with managing our social media accounts. And I also help with on Sundays, when we do our services, the only people that we have in person there are our band and the staff, and that comes out to be only 12 people. So I help with cleaning up after everybody leaves, so that the building is sanitized, so that it's very clean because of COVID. And so I help with that, and that makes everybody feel safe. So that's how I contribute with the church there. And so now back to Greg with um, the first question would be, do you want to talk about how you found out you had NLD and when you were diagnosed with it?
Sure. Well, it was so I'm 48. And I think about that for a second. I was diagnosed in 2006. So it would have been 14 minus 48, 34, 35. So yeah, I went through the full process of neuropsych testing with a PhD. I guess I don't know if I should share her name or not. I don't know if it matters, but in Boston at a major institution there. If anybody wants that name, I guess I can get that to them. But yeah, I went through the full battery of neuropsych testing, and I just remember reading the report. It said symptoms consistent with a nonverbal learning disability.
Yeah, it is good to share how you did with the testing and how it was done, because it's different for everybody. And, if they want to do research on how that is done, then they can look that up on their own. So it, I appreciate that you shared that. So when I got tested, I was 19 years old. I'm 24 years old now. So I had it done when I was in college. I graduated in 2018. So that was seven, well, yeah, it was 7 years ago when I was tested. That doesn't seem like that long ago for me. Um, and I I had it done because I had a personal hunch for a while that I was different from everybody else in my family. And I wanted to see if that hunch was right. And make a long story short, I was correct with the testing, obviously. I got it done at the right institute near UC Berkeley, um, where they do testing for different learning disabilities there, and it was a whole bunch of different testing. I think it was probably 15 or 20 different tests that I did, um, and it, I always had fun doing it because I was always curious. Okay, what is this going to show? It wasn't
Mhm.
like any academic tests that I was used to doing. So I had fun doing it. Um, and probably because I was young when I was doing it, I didn't find it too difficult to do, other than maybe when it was timed and it was mathematic. um, but Yeah, so that was how I was diagnosed, and I do remember that I when I felt how I felt afterwards, I kind of felt relieved because many light bulbs were going off for me and my family, and we're like, okay, this is why things were challenging for me growing up with math and writing and science when it had math in it, and everything was making more sense to us. Um, I don't know if you had that happen with yourself, Greg, at all.
Well, I think I certainly got it done for, yeah, similar reasons. I always felt like I was just a little bit different from everybody else. I can mask pretty well, uh, but yeah, that just kind of gets exhausting after a while. So yeah, same thing. I just always sensed I was just a little bit different. Just it took me longer to get jokes, for example, or I wouldn't
Mhm.
get them at all, or I was the guy almost guaranteed, unless it was in a movie, unless it was a documentary or some sort of straight nonfiction film. I would be that person that's like, Jennifer, can you tell me what that character is doing, and what did I miss, and what's going on here? And I just, I had good friends, but I can just recall conversations where they're like, dude, we're sick of you asking, we just want to watch the movie, kind of
Mm,
thing. Um, and then there were other things like, I was really good, am really good at basic math. But for example, as soon as it got to anything beyond basically arithmetic, I would really struggle with it. Learning to play the drums, I was really good at learning the bare bones, like just
huh,
a couple of rhythms and, something they call paradiddles. And I remember my friends thinking like, wow, you really picked that up really quickly, Greg.
okay.
But as soon as it advanced beyond like maybe the sixth grade or the seventh grade, I was behind, and I'm like, and I just couldn't quite, understand enough, I guess, to keep up. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I think I wanted to get checked out and tested for somewhat similar reasons to what you described, Jennifer.
Yeah, you are saying similar reasons, and you're already getting into some of the challenges that you noticed you were having with, picking up the sarcasm, which I can relate to also.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I got a little bit better at that where because my family and I, we watch some comedian shows like Stephen Colbert for news. And I'm starting to like that better because I'm getting into politics a little bit more. And sometimes I get his jokes, sometimes I don't. But when I do, I'm proud of myself because I'm like, okay, now I can laugh with my family and I don't feel bad about when they laugh and when I don't. Um, and also, when
Now,
you were talking about the drums, I think maybe why you picked that up quickly, at least in the beginning, was that maybe it had to do a little bit with some of the audio skills that people with NLD tend to have. So that might make it be easier with that.
could be, could be. Yeah, it's just, I guess we all kind of go in, you know, do it for, you know, look at ourselves for different reasons. And I wish I could say, and I know we'll probably get into some of this too. I wish I could say that I went with it and really ran with it since 2005, 2006, and have learned like all of these amazing things about myself and skills and whatnot. But I kind of envy, in a good way, either young people like yourself or people who got diagnosed really young, maybe at 5 years old or 7 years old, because you have the chance to, you don't have to wait until you're 50, and I think that's a real blessing, for example, or wait till you're 30 even, um, to kind of really learn how to, to live with it and kind of move forward and maybe focus on strengths. But I know I'm getting ahead, so I'll let you
That's
continue.
okay. I would agree with you. The earlier you get diagnosed, the better. And I would say for me, it was probably a little bit trickier than some people because you may not know this, but I was homeschooled before college. So I was in an online virtual school and I was tested as a child, but there wasn't enough to show if there was a diagnosis, enough results. So I had to have it, I guess you could say, redone. I don't remember what the tests were when I was a child, because at the age probably. Um, but because of being in a school that wasn't the traditional brick and mortar school, you could say, that I think my resources were maybe a little bit more limited in terms of getting the testing done in a way that might have showed some results. Uh, and I think sometimes the age does matter for something like NLD because sometimes, um, sometimes maybe it was true with me, this might be true with other people, that, like I said, they might be not enough to lean you towards NLD or not having it.
Mhm.
Or I mean, showing that you definitely have it. So but I do agree with you that if you are diagnosed or tested earlier, that does make it easier because then, like you said, you can work more on your strengths and differences or weaknesses, whatever you want to call them, um, because then you start to learn more about yourself. So if you want to, you can talk a little bit about, you know, this is kind of tricky, but um, how you feel about having NLD and maybe some of the challenges that it presents.
Sure, yeah, I can definitely talk about that for a while. Like I'm going through a phase of discovery now and trying to figure out just what we were just talking about. how do I focus on my strengths as much as my weaknesses. So I can very readily kind of go through and discuss how, um, NLD affects me. But I just want to share that for anybody who's listening. I would recommend to really, sooner rather than later, make a list of the good things about yourself, or even how NLD can positively affect you as well. Because it's very easy, at least for me, and I think probably others too, to go down the road of like, you know, I can't visualize. I need to ask for help during movies. I need to ask for extra help, for directions or complex math things. But anyway, so I just wanted to get that out there. I also wanted to say really quick too. So this past summer, because I let essentially 14, 15 years go by, I decided to go in for testing again. And just really struggling with pretty much every job I've ever had to either get up and running or stay up and running or develop systems, develop procedures that really work for me. I guess just I'm not describing it very well, but just I've struggled in any job I've ever had, getting up and running and staying up and running tremendously. So that's the reason I decided to go back for testing this summer. And it actually came back with autism level 1, which is high functioning autism. So I don't want to get into that whole debate of whether or not NLD is on the spectrum or not. But for me personally, my original diagnosis was NVLD, and all I can tell you is I relate so much more with the various, NLD and NVLD symptoms and the Facebook boards and groups I'm on than I do with, I guess, what used to be called Asperger's or autism level 1. But nonetheless, it is helpful to have that diagnosis as well, because it's helping me now with supports and accommodations. And my hunch is, this is just for me and my hunch, that they're lumping what I have in under autism level 1 in part to get the accommodations that I need. But I just wanted to get that out there, because that's a very new thing as well. And I know there's a lot of debate out there whether or not NVLD falls under the spectrum or not. But I am starting to use those terms sometimes now, Jennifer, when I talk to people that I'm on the spectrum. And I just find that it's kind of, you get less questions like, what's NLD? What is NVLD? I don't quite, it's not in the DSM-5. Okay, I'm
It
low
used
on
to
the
be.
spectrum. Did it used to be? Huh. Interesting. So I just say I'm low on the spectrum, and I'm finding I get fewer questions. But I think what you asked me is maybe how does NLD affect me, or where do I struggle? I think I shared a few of those things.
Right.
So yeah, anything visual spatially, if I have to, sometimes I struggle with like facial recognition, directions, anything that's more than, sometimes I can see 2 steps out. I can never see 3 or 4 or 5 steps out, whether that's driving the car or, again, learning a job or learning a procedure. It seems like I can never write fast enough when somebody's explaining something to me to not have to be like, hey, can you explain that to me again? How about again? How about again? It's like just extraordinarily frustrating for me, and I know for others in my life, to kind of to need the level of repetition, because I think in words, and yeah, so I guess I could go on, but there's some examples.
There's so many.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
there are.
I can relate with what you were saying too about the ASD spectrum, because I used to work with people on the ASD spectrum before I was working with my parents at the church. And I liked that work because I felt like I could relate to them because of having an LD. I could empathize with them because I have a challenging life because of having NLD. So they're not,
Hmm.
they are different, but, I could relate to them and say, hey, I know what it's like to have a brain that works differently.
Yes.
So I, they didn't, before I, with those jobs, those previous jobs, they didn't know I had a learning disability. So I think that kind of got in the way with those jobs. And I'm finding out now because I'm working with my parents, and of course, they know about that I have NLD. So that does make it easier because if I have issues that come up at my work with NL that are related to NLD, they can help me.
It sounds like your parents, from what I've heard in other podcasts too, Jennifer, are really supportive, and that is awesome. I just want to say that I haven't even
Yeah.
been able to yet disclose to my folks, and that's something I'm going to do within the next couple of weeks. But I think it's awesome that for those of you out there who have supportive parents, that's just a great thing.
It is, I'm very fortunate to have that with my parents and with my family. And I would say for people out there who are, like yourself, where you're not, you're at the point where, it's, how do I say this? It if I say want to say this correctly, where, it was hard, I think it was probably hard for you to figure out how to describe what NLD was probably, and try to have the support that you needed from your family, and you're at the point where you want to try to do that. And I can see why you want to do that because I'm, I'm on the other side where I do have support.
Hmm.
Um, and I know for me, I um, I like having the podcast because I can, when I get feedback from people, and they say that it's helping them, with encouraging them to do things like you want to do, then it makes me feel good because then
Hmm.
it's like I didn't I created the podcast because I wanted to raise awareness about NLD and what it is and help educate people. I didn't think it was going to help people with NLD initially.
Interesting. No, it's definitely great to hear other people's personal stories and struggles and triumphs. So I think it's a good thing. So keep doing it. Just real quickly back to my family. It's not just them, but it's like it's anybody really who's seen me have success. Like I can. It's really hard to, as you know, as
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of the listeners know, to be able to describe NVLD, especially to somebody in some ways who you know really well and maybe who knows you really well or thinks they know you really well. Like I could get, and I'm not speaking necessarily about parents here, but just anybody, I could get, well, how do you pass the Series 7 license, Greg? How do you, drive so well? And that's
Hmm.
debatable. But I'll just, how do you, do this and that? How did you graduate from
Right.
college? Like, you don't have a learning, you can't have a learning disability,
Exactly.
So it's like, well, yes, I can, and yes, I do, and this is why. But there's just there's that large discrepancy, as I understand it, between performance IQ and verbal IQ.
Yes.
So my performance IQ is down here, really low, and my verbal IQ is high average or low superior. So it's
Hmm.
good, but it's not the way those two come together. There's other people out there who can explain that a lot better than I, but that's kind of what creates the NLD. And it's not, when there's that discrepancy, I think in my case, it's 26 points. Um, it's really hard to perform. So even if my performance IQ is 100, that doesn't mean that I perform, at the mean. That doesn't mean my performance is at the mean of others who don't have a discrepancy between the verbal IQ and the performance IQ. So anyway, that's what I feel like I struggle with, is the performance and integrating information, utilizing information, replicating, finding information, and kind of being able to do that again a week later or 2 weeks later, if I didn't just do it an hour ago, or the day before. So hence why I think a lot of us, why myself why I try to gravitate towards repetition and jobs that kind of do similar things over and over and over again, because I just never quite know. And I'm sure I'm going way beyond the scope of your question, but I never quite know when something like novel is going to come up, or if it's something that maybe a boss is going to be like, well, we showed you how to do that 3 weeks ago, and we showed you again 6 weeks ago. And I'm like, well, if you didn't show me yesterday, or if I didn't do it this morning, we might as well start over again. So that's why, I gravitate, or I think it would be, I try to gravitate as much as possible towards consistency and routine, and away from novelty.
Yeah, I would agree with you that too, because if I look back over what I do now and I compare to what I was doing with my previous jobs with n- the ASD jobs, and I compare the two, I would say that I have more repetition now than I did before. And that makes it easier on myself. So
Mm-hmm.
I can relate to what you're saying about the repetition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that probably has to do with, I think this is one of the similarities with aut- autistic people where we like routines. And if there's a, change in it, it could be just a slight change. It can sometimes mess us up. And, you know, I remember when I was trying to adjust from an online school to a, I guess I could say a regular school for people. Um, I it was a big change for me because I was used to it just being me and my brother for school. And now I'm having to think, okay, there's going to be possibly 20 people in class with me, or 500, or, more people with me. And I'm going to have to be competing with them for help. And, you know, there were the first 2 years of college where I didn't have any accommodations because uh, I didn't have the diagnosis for NLD yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, you know, the second, the uh, latter years, I did. And as you know from the podcast, and other people will know, that made a huge difference with being able to do school. Made it a lot
I bet
easier.
it. I'm wondering if it also helped, like for me, I think we're going to get to this, but I'll be starting a new job shortly. And I
Hmm.
think I'm going to disclose sooner rather than later. And I know there's debate on that too, but I'm thinking the accommodations that you just described, and how maybe the second 2 years in many respects were easier or better than the first couple of years of college because you had those accommodations. I'm wondering if it also um, helped with other things like anxiety. Like, so I also struggle with anxiety, and I know the two play together. And
Hmm.
it's because I know I'm going to have to get up and running quickly. For example, in a job, I keep going to jobs, but it's just been the struggle of my life. Or I'm going to have to perform in a certain area. If I can treat the anxiety, that that really helps. So it's that the two are always go hand in hand. And I think the extent to which I can have maybe accommodations or build in more structure and support is the extent to which I'll have hopefully less of that anxiety that so often goes with NVLD.
Yes, I would agree with you. Anxiety does go hand in hand with NLD because I do remember when I, the time before I had accommodations and the time after, I I was able to take my tests in a room by myself usually with no distractions, and that helped because I was able to just focus on what I was doing. And so, you know, if because I felt like I had test anxiety. So, and I had more time to do the test. I was given more time. And so, you know, I feel like, with jobs, maybe, um, if they know about NLD and they can try to understand some aspects of it and how it relates to the job world, then they can help you out with, you know, but when you were saying with with the repeating with the instructions earlier, you know, I feel like I have that too a little bit when my or my dad is trying to describe something to me, and sometimes um I find myself, taking notes while they're saying something. And I don't know if you've tried this before, but I was thinking, you know, if they would let you at work, you could try to record what they're saying. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and that might help because then you could listen to it later on.
I'm going to ask them that. I think depending on the context, it's a great idea. There's different laws on
Yeah,
that, but obviously inside a company, um, you know, is probably has different regulations than certainly if you're recording,
of
you know,
course.
a client call or something like that. But which I would also wouldn't be a bad thing because then I could go back and be like, I need to listen to that call again and
Mhm.
really understand what the client was telling me. But yeah, no, that's a great idea, and I'm finding yes, whenever I can record things, I certainly do,
Yeah,
or I'll ask. Jennifer, how do I find this recording again? I mean, in this case, I know how, but
right.
how can I see this again? Because sometimes I just need to go through things a second time. And I
Yeah,
don't tell people I might have to go through it 13 times, but I'm exaggerating a little bit. But just knowing how to find, yeah, because we're so verbal. I'm so
exactly.
verbal to be able to hear it a second or third time is like gold.
Right, and I agree with you with that because I know one two of the accommodations I had in school were recording lectures and having audio of textbooks. And so those really help because those used my verbal skills and my audio memory skills and made it easier for me to remember things, and I could go back to the lectures and listen to them when I was wanting to study for tests. And if I, maybe missed something, I could go back and listen to it. Um, and also, it helped because in the programs I was using, I could also type alongside the visual pieces, so I could, create more detailed notes along with the audio piece. So that did help with that. Um,
Awesome.
so there are many resources out there that uh, I think some people don't know about, and that's okay because some I'm not blaming that they don't know about it because sometimes it's hard to figure out what is available for NLD because it's just it's hard for people to know what it is, even
Right.
psychologists, and that's why it's not on the DSM anymore. Um,
What DSM was it on? I'm just curious.
I think it was on the DSM-5. I do wanna do an episode on that because I'm curious
Huh.
about it myself.
Well,
And
that's the one that's, isn't that the one that's gonna come out, the DSM-5? Do you mean DSM-3 maybe? Because I think the DSM-4 is out now, if I'm not mistaken. I didn't think 5 was out yet, but I could be
that's a good
wrong.
that's a good point. It was probably on one of the previous ones,
Okay,
but it was on the DSM previously, yeah.
interesting.
And I think the reason it was taken off is because if I am understanding this correctly, and the little bit of research I did was that scientists couldn't agree on even what to call it. There's NLD, there's NVLD, and it's like they're basically the same acronym.
Well, and then there's the whole debate, which I alluded to earlier. Well, let's just call them Asperger's or
Right.
autism level one, like close enough kind of thing. It's like, well,
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure that's the case. I almost wonder, we might be getting off topic, but I almost wonder if when the DSM-5 comes out or whatever the next one is, if they are going to lump in NLD, NBLD under autism level one, because I happen to know at least two others like me who were initially
Mhm.
diagnosed with NLD and relate more to the NLD, features, we'll say, than the autism level one ones, but have subsequently also been with being on the spectrum. So who knows?
Right. I would agree with you with that because I, m- my I would say my perspective with it being on the spectrum is um I guess you could say a little bit more educated than some people because I worked with individuals on the spectrum, so I know a little bit about that. Um, but I think it might be on the spectrum, and if it was, it probably would be underneath Asperger's because it's a little bit, um, how do I want to say this? It's a little bit different than Asperger's and autism, but I think also NLD has a spectrum in its own because
Right.
everybody there's the list of symptoms, and we haven't even talked about all of them, but everybody can experience them to a different degree.
Sure.
With the visual spatial, for me, I have a hard time with the driving too, where I got I tried to get my license first when I was 17 and a half, and I didn't have enough practice to get the license. I had my permit, but I couldn't get the license because I didn't have enough practice. Um, and then I did eventually get it when I was 22. And now that I carpool with my parents to work to, save money, I feel like I'm losing the skill of driving because I don't drive anymore. And when I do try to practice driving in my own car, just in parking lots that are empty because I don't, you know, it's easier to practice that way. Um, and when I try to go park the car, that's the hardest thing for me to do. Um, I just feel like I'm starting all over again because I have to, you know, do it so many times to get it right.
Yeah, and I think especially for us, more so than maybe an NT, a neurotypical, we have to practice. Practice does
Yeah.
not make perfect, but practice does help and
Mhm.
keeping it fresh, like I was alluding to earlier. Yeah, if I'm not doing, I mean, maybe riding a bike, you can kind of say that, like, it's just like riding a bike. You just, once you know it, you always know it. But I agree, like driving and most the vast majority of things, probably more so than the average person. I've got to keep doing it and keep practicing to stay fresh.
Yeah, I would agree with you with that too. And, you know, because fine motor skills is a challenge with people with NLD, with the riding with the bike too, I learned that later also. And, you know, I feel like because I if like you were saying, if we don't do it repetitively, we tend to struggle more with it. And I would say, uh, uh, if it was, you know, one of the sports I do more frequently is skiing, and usually if I go back to that after a break because it's a winter sport, and I find myself realizing, "Oh, it seems like I never stopped."
Hmm.
And that feels that makes me feel good because my when my mom found out that I was diagnosed with NLD, after that happened, she was like she was impressed with how good I am with skiing because of the fine motor skills aspect. She was like, "Okay, this is really a good accomplishment for her because she it's just it's harder for her than it is for her brother because he's a neurotypical and I'm not."
Sure,
um,
I get it.
as I wrap up, there are some things I would like to share with you. I do have a website for this podcast. It is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook and Instagram page for this podcast. It is called Living with NLD. I will include the links for those in the description. In conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience. If you know individuals with NLD that I could interview for this podcast, please email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com. What are you interested in learning about NLD? I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also, see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than it originally was. Thank you for listening today, and please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Thank you. Bye.